So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can set up a new paper material service from scratch. Starting off, we'll have to check our settings and then our vendors folder, paper vendors, and we'll have to make sure that any vendor we want to apply to our new material is already entered in here so we don't have to circle back to it later. We'll go over to our services tab and we'll start setting up our service. So I've clicked into paper and then paper department, and our category is bond. So this is where I'm going to be creating my new service. So I'll just click new and we'll start from scratch. In this window that pops up, this is our services window where generally you're going to see the same layout, and you can get some information for the type of service you're setting up from the header, where you can see the category name is bond and the category type is paper, so we know what we're setting up here. So the name we need to give it, service name, I'll give it 20 pound bond, and I'll call it 20 pound white. If this was based on a specific color, specific cost and pricing, you can put that into the title. Otherwise, if you're trying to keep it a generalized service, like you can see in the back here, 20 pound color, that'll allow you to enter in the color you're using as a note instead of basing it on a specific color, which is usually better if all the colors are sharing the same cost and price. Doesn't work so well if they have different cost or price. So I'll base this one on white, and I'll apply the sales department for paper. And then invoice name, pop-up reminder, and default color. Those are all optional fields that you may or may not use. I'm going to leave those blank for now. The size field I do need for my calculations, so I'll put 8.5 by 11. And then the caliper here is used for determining lifts and cuts, so I'll need that information also. I can click where it says caliper and the three little dots. And you can see I've already found my caliper, 0.004 for 20 pound bond, but if there's more, or if there's a different paper that I'm trying to set up, there's more examples I can click on our website. So these are all the common calipers that can typically be found. And you can do a Google search or visit your paper's vendor site if you want to for more information. So my caliper is 0.004. And now I can move down to the pricing properties area. So we have a few fields that need to be set up. The quantity is locked in here. We don't need to change that unless we're setting up a multi-part carbon list in which we'd put the number of parts in here. So if it's a 3-part material, I would put 3 in there and the program would update its calculations accordingly. And that would also inform my material cost field where I'd have to adjust my material cost to be divided by the number of parts. Next we have the waste table, which is set to row 1 by default. There's no paper waste, there's all these rows, and then there's built-in formula. It's always assigned waste table row 1 by default, and that's so the difficulty of the printer can use that information if it needs it. If your paper is generally wasteful, you could say use a certain row and set it to that row, and you could look at your waste table, which is accessible on the left-hand side. This is a global waste table, so whatever row you reference, it'll use that variable amount of waste based on the run size impressions. So at these breaks, 100, 500, 1,000, the different rows are changing the amount of waste that they need for that job. The setup sheets are not changing. So row 1 here would say 10 setup sheets, and at a quantity of 1,000 impressions, we'd have 5.7% waste. And then at the very bottom, you can set limits. So once we have that set up, we can move on down to the time field. Time field here is for offset presses that are configured in a specific way to use your materials information instead of a generalized amount of information. So your printer would have to be set up to use this information, but you could use this to keep your offset press as accurate as possible. So I could say I need, for this particular material, 5 minutes in setup time per plate. And for this particular material, I have 3,000 run size impressions per hour. Otherwise, I don't need to update this if my printer isn't set to do that. Next, I have my cost, which is set to material cost, and then we have a multiplier below that. There's a few options for cost, but none of them really apply. We should just be sticking with material cost only. And then what that does is it informs how we're going to set up the run table off to the right. So off to the right, we have a setup and a run table. We're not using the setup table, we're just going to use the run table. So in this material cost field, I'm going to put what I'm paying my vendor, $8 per 1,000. And I know that means per 1,000 because the quantity is set to parent size sheets, and the material cost and run prices are field below here is set to per thousand. So that defines this material cost as $8 per thousand. All right, and then once I have that set up, I can look down at this multiplier here, which a lot of the defaults services will have 1.2, which means 20%. So that'll take that $8 that I'm paying my vendor, and it'll add additional costs, storage and handling and stuff like that, and it's going to bump it up to $960 before it even gets to pricing. Just below that, we have our pricing, which is cost plus markup. That's the standard for materials. There are a few other options if you want to set up something different and kind of customize it, but you shouldn't need to just based on how these are generally priced out. So we have our $8 up to $960 using this multiplier here. And then we're applying our pricing, which is our just a general amount of markup to our costs. We have 3 markup fields here. These are all for marking up. The first box is for offset, the second box is for digital, and the third box is for blank sheets. So depending on the type of printing you're doing, you're going to have different markup. So the examples I like to use is in this first offset box that says percent or number in the header, the symbols, I'll put 1. Then in digital, I'll put 20. And then in blank, I'll put 100. So effectively what I've done is for offset jobs, I've made a variable amount of markup. And if I click here, I can see markup, and it tells me this information. 1 through 19 uses the global variable markup table. 20 and up is just a percentage. So the digital and the blank sheets here are both just 20% and 100%. The offset box is referencing row 1, so on the left-hand side, I'll open up my markup table. And that's referencing the first row, which is low in my description, where at these different cost breaks in dollars, I'm getting this 18%, 12%, 8% variable markup. So yours might not look like this. You might have yours customized. You might want to create a new row for this material, or you might have an existing row that you assign your materials to, and you can update it accordingly. And just below the markup, we have our adjustment fields. Again, anywhere there's 3 dots, you can click. Gives you some information about how to use this. Bid, rush, and special are all price levels for items. You can set them to. Bid is typically more competitive for quoting. So we'll typically set that to 0.75, which is effectively marking it down 25% from its default. Rush, 1.5, which is marking this service up by 50%. And then special pricing, which is double price. And once I have those on there, I can choose if I want that to multiply the markup or the price. And then these will get selected on the order or item itself. Just below that, we have a minimum price. If I put $10 in here and my price doesn't come out to $10, it'll bump it up to that. In this modified field, I can click, and I have a default note here. I can just click that really quickly, and it's now changed this date to today, and it said I've modified my cost. Leaving yourself a good note trail is critical for updating and maintaining your software. So that's just recommended to include into your best practices. I could also click where this little pen is, and I can get more quick note options here. I could date stamp, date and time, or I could use any of my quick notes that I have pre-configured in here. So theoretically, I could just say date and time, quick note, and then one of my quick notes would be updated pricing or updated costs or whatever you typically would change, and then it's just a few clicks instead of typing it in. Aside from that, at the very bottom, we have this little bar, and then on the left-hand side, we have the more properties. Both of them take you to the same place. And if I click there, I can update my optional tools, scheduler, and inventory. But really what I'm here for is the default vendor. I want to apply the vendor that I created earlier, and I want to put an SKU number in here. So once I have that in there, I'll click Save, and now my service is all set up and it's ready for testing. I can go and create a simple order with a paper and a printer, keep the quantity at a nice round number of 1,000, and then just check my output. There aren't many surprises in testing paper services, so if you're not getting the output you expect, just review the little typically overlooked details, these little drop downs, the multiplier options, stuff like that. If you need any further help with that, you can reach out to our support team at support@printreach.com. Thank you.